As officials in Alberta continue to wrestle with wildfires burning in that province, a new book is taking a closer look at the devastating Fort McMurray wildfire. Fire 009, that was the number assigned to the blaze that would force the most evacuations in Alberta's history. Fire Weather is a fascinating book and a look at what was happening on the ground as residents were fleeing those flames and officials were fighting them. It also unpacks the science of why things are burning bigger, hotter, and more aggressively. Author John Vaillant joins us this morning from Vancouver. Welcome.
Hey, good morning.
You started writing this book, John, in 2016, right after the Fort Mac wildfires. You know, I remember the reporting from that time. People who were trying to leave the city and their dashboards melting because of the heat from the flames so close to their cars. You know, obviously, you don't have control over what was happening in the world when this book finally publishes, yet here we are. Wildfires once again in our headlines. What does that say to you?
Well, it says what a lot of fire scientists have been telling us really for decades now, that fires are going to burn hotter in a warmer, drier atmosphere. And that's what we've been seeing, these more common extremes of heat and dryness and fire intensity, especially in the Canadian West.
Fire weather isn't just the title of your book, it's actually a technical term. I love that there are fire scientists. Can you explain what fire weather means? Because you write about wildfires creating their own weather systems.
Yeah, and we really saw that in Fort McMurray, and we actually saw that just last week. When you get enough heat, the fire grows big enough to really create its own weather system, and sometimes even a pyrocumulonimbus cloud, which is a mouthful, but it's also a massive system that really reaches into the stratosphere, can make its own lightning, and can generate hurricane-force winds. And fire weather is the way that fire scientists and firefighters measure the flammability, really, of the forest. So it takes into account the dryness of the soil, of the forest litter, of relative humidity, temperature, puts it all together, and you get a fire weather index rating. And obviously last week, the fire weather index was really high.
You know, I remember in doing some of the reporting around those wildfires about that idea of its own system and firefighters calling it a beast because really it may be out of control on the ground, but it's almost like the fire takes control at that point.
It absolutely does. It really starts dictating the terms of engagement, if you will. And so with those winds and with the massive height of the clouds, it actually generates its own lightning, which means it can start its own fires 20 miles away, 30 miles away. And when you have the forest as dry as the Canadian boreal has been these past few summers, that means you have really unlimited fuel and a system that can keep its own fire going basically indefinitely.
Hence the concern from scientists. In a typical house fire, there is structural evidence that's left behind, walls, supporting structures. Well, what we saw in Fort McMurray was very different. There was nothing left. One official said you'd go to where a house once was, and the only thing left was the nails. So talk to us how the Fort McMurray fires were different.
Yeah, they were really devastating, and that was by virtue of the sheer intensity of the heat being brought to bear on these structures. So you had extraordinary heat, literally metal melting heat, combined with the modern house. And what most of us don't realize or really think about is the modern house is composed largely of petroleum products. When you think of vinyl siding, when you think of tar shingles, vinyl windows, all the upholstery, all the stuffing in our mattresses, all that stuff will combust like an oil refinery if you get it hot enough. And that's what this fire did. And so you had total combustion. Firefighters reported to me burn times of entire houses, 5 minutes, from a structure with a roof standing by itself to a flaming basement.
5 minutes, wow.
5 minutes.
If we are heading into a hotter, more volatile future, what, if anything, should we be doing right now?
One of the biggest, most important things we can do is reduce our emissions. Right now, we live in a fire-powered society. Fossil fuels are appealing to us because they burn, and we burn them in massive quantities globally. And of course, it creates massive amounts of emissions, including CO2, which is a well-known greenhouse gas. So currently, we are supercharging the atmosphere to retain more heat and generate more powerful fires. So one of the things we can do is reduce the amount of combustion. that we're engaged in, and that's through electrification and working toward net zero. And the other is to think much more carefully about how we build our houses and where we build them. And building them in thickly forested areas has demonstrated itself to be really hazardous, especially for Canadians.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point. In one of those photographs that we showed, you can see where the house line and the forest were really only a pathway apart. And I spoke to a firefighter there who said that can't happen anymore. It is fascinating, John, to talk to you this morning, especially with the pictures that we're seeing coming from Alberta on these firefighters. And your book, Fire Weather, definitely puts it into context for us. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Good morning.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.